Hello fanatics, welcome to another episode of our murder, mystery and kitting up Sunday. Today I am kitting up Blossom Fairy. Yeah, for Spring Flings, an event I am hosting here on my channel. But, oh my gosh, today, oh my gosh, we are going to be talking about the second most prolific serial killer in the United States. And this is according to his confirmed numbers. Deary me. Why do we do this on a Sunday evening? Oh, we dive into these things. So, how are you doing? Are you enjoying Spring Flings? It only started 1st of March, and but yeah, well underway. Thank you for joining me live on Friday, and for those of you who replayed as well, I do appreciate that. And yeah, we're here for a couple of months now doing Spring Flings and Easter things. Just very quickly, I just want to talk about May. Yeah, in May, I'm going to be hosting another event, and it's going to be for mental health awareness. And I'm going to sit and I'm going to either go live and chit-chat about my own issues with mental health and my past, and it's not easy listening, to say the least. Some of you know some of what I've been through, but that's what we're going to do for the month of May. And yeah, hashtag I've been there 2024 is what we're calling it. And it's whatever you are working on at the time, and it's about bringing awareness to mental health. It's a place where we can come together and share our own stories. You are more than welcome to join me on the live if you so wish. No pressure. But yeah, that's what we're going to do for the month of May. There's no pressure. Whatever kit you are working on, it doesn't have to be a fresh start. You can plan ahead for the month of May if you have a canvas that you really want to work on. There's no rhyme or reason to the kits. It's just whatever you are working on, whether it be with another event. I know Phoenix Fantasy, I'm a big supporter of Phoenix Fantasy. That is in May also. Bring your canvases over. You're more than welcome. And yeah, of course I'm sponsoring Phoenix Fantasy. Nix is a very good friend of mine. And yeah, I think the J Wall event's going on as well. Is that April and May? I think it is. I'm sponsoring that also. So yeah, feel free to bring those along. And come down, paint, share them on the whip wheels in the group. I will link the group down below. It is in my diamond painting group, the one that is open to everyone, everywhere. That's where I'm hosting that. So I will link that down below. But anyway, that's not what we're here for. Okay, I will do a video on that shortly, and I'll upload that for May so you can plan ahead. But today we are going to be talking about the second most prolific serial killer in the United States, and that is Gary Ridgway. And if that name escapes you and you don't know who Gary Ridgway is, he is the Green River Killer. I was just watching a documentary on it. I was watching all the police. The police were talking about all different things, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to dive into this. So I did. I've stopped watching it because I want to dive into it personally. So as always, I'm going to start with the early life, moving forward, and sadly talk about the victims, and there is a lot. making him the second most prolific serial killer. Okay, grab your project, come down, paint, put your earbuds in, do your housework, whatever you do when you listen to my true crime story time. Thank you for joining me, and let's dive into today's episode. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February the 18th in 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. The second of Mary and Thomas Ridgway's 3 sons. His home life was somewhat troubled. Relatives described his mother as domineering, and have said that while young he witnessed more than one violent argument between his parents. His father was a bus driver who would often complain about the presence of sex workers. That explains everything. Not. Ridgway, as I'm going to call him, had a bedwetting problem until he was 13, and his mother would wash his bits and pieces after every episode. He would later tell defence psychologists that as an adolescent he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction towards his mother and fantasised about killing her. Bedwetting until your late teens is normal. Well, I wouldn't say normally an indicator, but it is one of the red flags. When you're bedwetting way beyond the norm, so to speak. He was also dyslexic and was held back a year in high school. When he was 16, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy who survived the attack. Ridgway had led the boy into the woods and then stabbed him through the ribs into his liver. Ridgway's IQ was recorded as being in, quote, the low 80s. Ridgway graduated from high school in 1969, and he married his 19-year-old high school girlfriend, Claudia Craig. He joined the United States Navy and was sent to Vietnam, where he served on board a supply ship and saw combat. During his time in the military, Ridgway had frequent interactions with sex workers and contracted gonorrhea. Although angered by this, he continued this activity without protection, and the marriage ended within a year. When questioned about Ridgway after his arrest, friends and family described him as friendly but strange. His first 2 marriages resulted in divorce because of infidelities by both partners. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, claimed that he had placed her in a chokehold. He became religious during his second marriage, going door to door reading the Bible aloud at work and at home, and insisted that his wife follow the strict teachings of their pastor. Ridgway would also frequently cry after sermons or reading the Bible. Despite his beliefs, Ridgway continued to solicit the services of sex workers and wanted his wife to participate in sex in public and inappropriate places. Maybe the church? Sometimes even in areas where his victims' bodies were later discovered. That's just sick. According to women in his life, Ridgway had an insatiable sexual appetite. 3 ex-wives and several ex-girlfriends reported that he demanded sex from them several times a day. Often, he would want to have sex in a public area or in the woods. Ridgeway himself admitted to having a fixation with sex workers, with whom he had a love-hate relationship. He frequently complained about their presence in the neighbourhood, like his dad did, but he also took advantage of their services regularly. In a statement read at his plea hearing, Gary Ridgeway said he hated prostitutes and didn't want to pay them. Some have speculated that Ridgeway was torn between his lust and his staunch religious beliefs. With his second wife, Marcia, Ridgeway had a son. Throughout the 80s and the 90s, Ridgeway is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women near Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. In court statements, Ridgeway later reported that he had killed so many that he had lost count. A majority of the murders occurred between 1982 and 1984. The victims were believed to be either sex workers or runaways whom he had picked up along the Pacific Highway South. Ridgeway sometimes showed the women a picture of his son to trick them into trusting him. They would engage in sexual activity, and after minutes of intercourse from behind, Ridgeway would wrap his forearm round the front of their necks and use the other arm to pull back as tightly as he could, strangling them. He killed most of his victims in his home, his truck, or a secluded area. Most of their bodies were dumped in a wooded area around the Green River, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, and other, quote, dump sites within South King County. There were also 2 confirmed and another 2 suspected victims found in Portland, Oregon. The bodies were often left in clusters, sometimes posed, usually nude. He would sometimes return to the victims' bodies and engage in necrophilia. I'm assuming you know what that is. It's what Ted Bundy did. Yeah. Ridgeway later explained that he did not find necrophilia more sexually satisfying, but having sex, with the deceased reduced his need to obtain a living victim and thus limited his exposure to being caught. Because most of the bodies were not discovered until the skeletal remains, 2 victims were still unidentified. Ridgeway occasionally contaminated the dump sites with gum, cigarettes, and written materials belonging to others, and he even transported a few victims' remains across state lines into Oregon to confuse the police. In the early 1980s, the King County Sheriff's Office formed the Green River Task Force to investigate the murders. That's what I've been watching. Task Force members included Robert Keppel and David Reichert, who periodically interviewed incarcerated serial killer Ted Bundy in 1984. Bundy offered his opinions on the psychology, motivations, and behaviour of the killer. He suggested that the killer was revisiting the dump sites to have sex with his victims, which turned out to be true. And if police found a fresh grave, they would stake it out and wait for him to come back. Also contributing to the investigation was FBI Special Agent John Douglas, who developed a profile on the suspect. Ridgeway was arrested in 1982 and 2001 on charges related to prostitution. He became a suspect in the Green River killings in 1983. In 1984, Ridgeway passed a polygraph test. On April 7, 1987, police took hair and saliva samples from Ridgeway. You got to bear in mind that in 1982, 83, 84, 85, DNA was like nowhere near what it is today. He would have been caught, banged to rights and in jail before he knew what was happening, if it was happening today. But this is 1980, and it wasn't where it is now. Around 1985, excuse me, Ridgeway began dating Judith Mawson, who became his third wife in 1988. See, it's infuriating. He's just going about his life, obviously still killing, but he's dating and getting married, and he should be in jail by now. Judith claimed in a 2010 television interview that when she moved into his house while they were dating, there was no carpet. Detectives later told her that he had probably wrapped a body in the carpet. In the same interview, she described how he would leave for work early in the morning some days, pretending that it was for overtime pay. Judith speculated that he must have committed some of the murders while supposedly working these early morning shifts. She claimed that she had not suspected Ridgeway's crimes before she was contacted by authorities in 1987 and had not heard of the Green River killer before that time because she did not watch the news. Author Penny Moorhead interviewed Ridgeway in prison, and he said while he was in the relationship with Judith, his kill rate went down and that he truly loved her. Of his 49 known victims, only 3 were killed after he married Judith. Judith told a local television reporter, quote, "I feel I have saved lives by being his wife and making him happy," end quote. The samples collected in 1987 were later subjected to DNA profiling, providing the evidence for his arrest warrant. On November the 30th, 2001, Ridgeway was at the Kenworth truck factory where he worked as a spray painter when police arrived to arrest him. Ridgeway was arrested on suspicion of murdering 4 women nearly 20 years earlier, after first being identified as a potential suspect. When DNA evidence conclusively linked semen left in the victims to the saliva swab taken by the police. The 4 victims named in the original indictment were Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. 3 more victims, Wendy Cofield, Brenda Bonner, and Deborah Estes, were added to the indictment after a forensic scientist identified microscopic spray paint spheres as a specific brand and composition of paint used at the Kenworth factory during the specific time frame when these victims were killed. Early in August 2003, Seattle Television News reported that Ridgeway had been moved from a maximum security cell at King County Jail to an Airway Heights minimum medium security level tank. Other news reports stated that his lawyers, led by Anthony Savage, were closing a plea bargain that would spare him the death penalty in return for his confession to a number of the Green River murders. On November the 5th, 2003, Ridgeway entered a guilty plea to 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder. As part of a plea bargain agreed to in June that would spare him execution in exchange for his cooperation in locating the remains of his victims and providing other details. In his statement accompanying his guilty plea, Ridgeway explained that he had killed all of his victims inside King County, Washington, and that he had transported and dumped the remains of the 2 women near Portland, Oregon, to confuse police. Deputy Prosecutor Jeffrey Bard noted in court that the deal contained, quote, the names of 41 victims who would not be in the subject of State versus Ridgeway if it were not for the plea agreement, end quote. King County Prosecuting Attorney Norm Mayleng explained his decision to make the deal. Quote, we could have gone forward with 7 counts, but that is all we could have ever hoped to solve. At the end of the trial, whatever the outcome, there would have been a lingering doubt about the rest of these crimes. This agreement was the avenue to the truth, and in the end, the search for the truth is still why we have a criminal justice system. Gary Ridgeway does not deserve our mercy. He does not deserve to live. The mercy provided by today's resolution is directed not at Ridgeway, but towards the families who have suffered so much. End quote. On December the 18th, 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones sentenced Ridgeway to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole to be served consecutively. He was also sentenced to an additional 10 years for the tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims, adding 480 years to his 48 life sentences. I don't think he's getting out somehow, or without the possibility of parole. I don't think he's coming out. Later, he was given another life sentence after the remains of his 49th victim were found. Ridgeway led prosecutors to 3 bodies in August 2003. On August the 16th of that year, the remains of a 16-year-old girl found near, I can't even pronounce that, Washington, 40 feet from State Route 410, were pronounced as belonging to Pammy Annette Avent, who had been believed to be a victim of the Green River Killer. The remains of Marie Malvar and April Bartram were found in September 2003. On November 23, 2005, the Associated Press reported that a weekend hiker found the skull of one of the 48 women Ridgeway admitted murdering in his 2003 plea bargain with King County prosecutors. The skull of another victim, Tracy Winston, who was 19 when she disappeared from Northgate Mall on September the 12th, 1983, was found November the 20th, 2005, by a man hiking in a wooded area near Highway 18, southeast of Seattle. This was the find that led to Ridgeway's 49th life sentence. In 2023, remains formerly known as Bone 17 was discovered in 1985, were identified as belonging to murder victim Lori Ann Raspotnik, who had disappeared from Seattle in 1982. Ridgeway confessed to more confirmed murders than any other American serial killer. Over a period of 5 months of police and prosecutor interviews, he confessed to 48 murders, 42 of which were on the police list of probable Green River Killer victims. On February the 9th, 2004, county prosecutors began to release the videotaped records of Ridgeway's confessions. In one taped interview, he initially told investigators that he was responsible for the deaths of 65 women. In another taped interview with the task force detective on December 31st, 2003, Ridgeway claimed to have murdered 71 victims and confessed to having sex with them before killing them, a detail which he did not reveal until after his sentencing. In his confession, he acknowledged that he targeted prostitutes because they were the most, quote, easy to pick up, and that he, quote, hated most of them. He confessed he had sex with his victims' bodies after he murdered them, but claimed he began burying the later victims so that he could resist the urge to commit necrophilia. Ridgeway was placed in solitary confinement at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla in January 2004. On May the 14th, 2015, he was transferred to the USP Florence High, a high-security federal prison east of Cannon City, Colorado. In September 2015, after a public outcry and discussions with Governor Jay Inslee, Corrections Secretary Bernie Warner announced that Ridgeway would be transferred back to Washington to be, quote, easily accessible for open murder investigations. Ridgeway was returned by chartered plane to Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla from USP Florence High on October the 24th, 2015. Before Ridgeway's confession, authorities had attributed 49 murders to the Green River Killer. Ridgeway confessed to murdering at least 71. Ridgeway's victims were not any specific race. Rather, they were all financially poor, and except for 3 of them, were all younger women and girls between the ages of 14 and 26, whom he had found in vulnerable circumstances, often working as prostitutes or having run away from home. At the time of Ridgeway's December 18, 2003 sentencing, authorities had been able to find at least 48 sets of remains, including victims not originally attributed to the Green River Killer. Ridgeway was sentenced for the deaths of each of these 48 victims, with a plea agreement that he would plead guilty to any and all future cases in King County, where his confession would be corroborated by reliable evidence. Wendy Lee Cofield, 16. Giselle Ann Lovorn, 17. Deborah Lynn Bonner, 23. Marcia Faye Chapman, 31. Cynthia Jean Hines, 17. Opal Charmaine Mills, 16. Terry Renee Milligan, 16. Mary Bridget Meehan, 18. Deborah Lorraine Estes, 15. It's just heartbreaking. Linda Jane Rule, 16. Denise Darsel Bush, 23. Shonda Leah Summers, 16. Shirley Marie Sherrill, 18. Rebecca, known as Becky Marrero, 20. Colleen Rennie Brockman, 15. Sandra Denise Major, 20. Wendy Stevens, 14. Alma Ann Smith, 18. Dolores Williams, 17. Laurie Ann Raspotnik. She was between 15 and 16. She died in the spring or summer of 1983. Her body was found in December 1985. Gail Lynn Matthews, 23. Andrea Marion Childers, 19. Sandra K. Gabbert, 17. Kimmy Kai Reichspitzer, 16. Mary Jane, known as Marie Malvar, 18. Carol Ann Christiansen, 21. Martina Teresa Ortherly, 18. Cheryl Lee Wims, 18. Yvonne, known as Shelley Antosh, 19. Carrie Ann Rios, 15. Constance Elizabeth Nayon, 19. Tammy Charlene Lyles, 16. Kelly Marie Ware, 22. Tina Marie Thompson, 21. April Dawn Buttram, 16. Debbie May Abernathy, 26. Tracy Ann Winson, 19. Maureen Sue Fenney, 19. Mary Sue Bellow, 25. Pammy Annette Avent, 15. Delise Louise Plager, 22. Kimberly Nelson, 21. Lisa Lorraine Yates, 19. Mary West, 16. Cindy Ann Smith, 17. Patricia Michelle Barksack, 19. Roberta Joseph Hayes, 21. Marta Reeves, 36. Patricia Ann Yellowrobe, 38. Before Ridgeway's confession, authorities had not attributed 6 of the victims to the Green River Killer. Ridgeway's confession and directions led police search crews to find the bodies of 3 in August and September. On December 21st, 2010, hikers near the West Valley Highway in Auburn, Washington, found a skull in the vicinity of where Marie Malva's remains had been found in 2003. The skull was identified as belonging to Rebecca, known as Becky, Marrero, who was last seen leaving the Western Six Motel at South 168th Street and Pacific Highway South on December 3rd, 1982. The King County prosecutor confirmed that Ridgeway would be formally charged with her murder on February the 11th, 2011. On February the 18th, 2011, he entered a guilty plea in the murder of Rebecca, adding a 49th sentence to his 48. Ridgeway confessed to murdering Rebecca in his original plea bargain, but due to the insufficient evidence, the charges could not be filed. Therefore, there was no charge in his current incarceration status. The remains of Tracy Winston were found without a skull in Kent's Cottonwood Grove Park in March 1986. Tracy's skull was found in November 2005 near Tiger Mountain, miles away from the discovery site and the rest of her body. Police assume someone carried it to the location. Sandra Denise Major was not identified until June 2012. A family member asked the King County Sheriff to investigate after seeing a TV movie about Ridgeway. DNA confirmed her identity. Wendy Stevens, previously known as Jane Doe, B10, was previously unidentified. Ridgeway claimed that she was a white female in her early 20s and possibly had brown hair. Examination of the remains suggests that she was actually between 12 and 18, most likely around 15. She was later confirmed to be 14. Analysis of the victim's skeleton indicated that she was probably left-handed, and she at one point in her life had a skull fracture to the left temple that later healed. Jane Doe, B17, was discovered on January the 2nd, 1986. Remains had been found in another area, February the 18th, 1984, were later matched to this victim. In 2003, Ridgeway claimed responsibility for her death. In December 2023, DNA testing identified the victim as Laurie Ann Raspotnik, who had run away from home in 1982 at the age of 15. Jane Doe B20 was discovered in August 2003. Because the remains were partial, her face could not be reconstructed and her race could not be determined, but she was estimated to have been between 13 and 24 years old at the time of her death. She was estimated to have been murdered between 1970 and 1993, but she was believed to have been murdered during the first decade. How insane does that sound? Of Ridgeway's murder spree. In January 2024, DNA testing identified the victim as Tammy Lyles. A separate set of remains had been found in Oregon in 1985 and identified in 1988 from dental records. Ridgeway is suspected of, but not charged with, murdering the remaining 6 victims of the original list attributed to the Green River Killer. In each case, either Ridgeway did not confess to the victim's death, or authorities have not been able to corroborate their suspicion with reliable evidence. Amina, 35. Casey Ann Lee, 16. Kelly K. McGinnis, 18. Angela Marie Gardner, 16. Patricia Osborne, 19. Ridgeway denied killing Amina. She does not fit the profile of any of the victims of the Green River Killer, considering her age, and she was not a sex worker or a teenage runaway. Although he has never been charged with her murder, during police interrogations in 2003, Ridgeway did confess to killing Cassie Ann Lee. He stated that he strangled her in 1982 and left her body near a drive-in theatre off SeaTac Strip. Law enforcement officials have been unable to locate her remains at the dump site that he had indicated. Evidence exists to suggest that Ridgeway murdered Kelly K. McGinnis shortly before her disappearance. Kelly was questioned by a Port of Seattle police officer while, air quote, dating Ridgeway near the SeaTac Strip. Furthermore, during the summer of 2003, Ridgeway led authorities to the bodies of several of his victims. One of those bodies, later identified as that of April Buttram, was initially identified by Ridgeway as being that of Kelly K. According to Ridgeway, he often confused both of them because of their similar physiques. Ridgeway is a suspect in the death of Angela Marie Gardner. Her remains were discovered within a mile of the bodies of known victims Shirley Sherrill, Dennis Bush and Tammy Lyles, and she remained unidentified until October 2009. Ridgeway has been considered a suspect in the disappearance and murders of several other women not attributed at the time to the Green River Killer. No charges have been filed. An unidentified black female, possibly bearing the first name Michelle, was a possible victim of Ridgeway. She has never been located or identified. Cora was the mother of NBA player Martell Webster. She disappeared when her son was 4 years old. Ridgeway was long suspected for the 1987 murder of Rose Marie Curran, a 16-year-old addict and prostitute, but was recently ruled out as a suspect. There's no end to this guy's trail of tragedy, is there? It just, oh my gosh. I had heard of the Green River Killer. I knew he left bodies along the Green River. I just did not realise how prolific it was. I had no idea. And this guy has just gone on and on for decades, and he was questioned by police in 1982, and they couldn't link him to anything. They did actually suspect someone else at the time because he failed a polygraph, and the FBI profile told them that they will inject themselves into the case but try to throw it to someone else. And this guy just phoned up the hotline and said, hey, you might want to look at this person, and instead they looked at him, and they pulled him in, and it turned out it was not him. Obviously it was Gary Ridgway. But oh my gosh, what a trail of devastation this guy had left. Absolute destruction. And it's just appalling. He had been a suspect in the murders since 1982, when he was arrested for prostitution. However, investigators were unable to link him to the murders at that time. Later advances in DNA profiling allowed investigators to definitively link him to the murders, and he was arrested on November the 30th, 2001. I mean, wow. Absolute devastation. But there you go. I know this is a very well-covered case. He is one of the most prolific serial killers. I think he's still walking the planet. I don't think he's past 70. He's 75 now. Yeah, I do believe he's still walking the planet. And he's currently at Washington State Penitentiary. We don't say that word in England. Walla Walla in Washington. But there you go. You guys, thank you for bearing with me. Oh, wow. We do this on Sundays. We dive into a true crime, and then my heart, of course, goes out to all of the victims and all of their families, and oh my gosh. But thank you for joining me in today's episode. I do appreciate it. As always, please do leave your thoughts and comments down below. I'm guessing you've heard of this case already. One of the most prolific cases that I've covered. I mean, wow. He's dead between the eyes, for sure. But there you go. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. And I will be back next week. We are going live tomorrow, Monday, at 8 p.m. my time. We're doing giveaways and spring flings and all that good fun that we have. And enjoy the rest of your evening, and please stay safe out there, and I'll be seeing you next week. Bye.